많이 와주셔서 감사해요. 오늘 에릭 비데 교수님, 불란서의 르방 유니버시티에 계시고, 오늘 주제는 소셜 이코노미 아마 되게 인트로하는 내용들이기 때문에 이 사회적 경제에 대해서 학습할 수 있는 좋은 기회라고 생각합니다. 플로어 큐.
Okay, it's working. Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Kim, for introducing and inviting me today. So I will make a presentation about social economy in France. My presentation will be in English, however. I would have liked to do it in Korean, but my Korean is too poor for that, so I'm very sorry about it. I hope English is fine for you. So first of all, a few words to introduce myself. Maybe you got information through the announcement of the conference. I'm a professor at Le Mans University, where I am directing the Master of Social Economy. I'm the chair of Social Economy. I've been there for 15 years now. And before that, I was used to live in Korea for about 10 years. And also, I am an involvement in an NGO called ADES, which is devoted to improve knowledge about social economy. And I've been co-chairing this NGO for 5 years now, almost 6. My research has been on social economy, as you understood probably, for almost 30 years now. And for almost 25 years on social economy in Korea as well. I wrote my Ph.D. in Sociology at the University of Paris about social economy in Korea in 2001, so quite a long time ago. And my research work focused on social economy organization, and social economy organization as hybrids, where you can find different logics, institutional logics, that combine together and that are intentions together. And that's the main point I think I use in most of my research works to analyze social economy and see how such organizations transform and how the governance, very specific governance, can be challenged sometimes by such tensions inside. The terminology in France, on the slide you can see I picked up a few publications related to my work that you can see, and some of them actually was in collaboration with Professor Kim as well in the two journals that you can see on the slide. The terminology in France, which is used now, actually, is, as you may know, social and solidarity economy. Today, I will simply say social economy for simplification, and because in some countries, and I think in Korea, still we continue to use social economy more than social and solidarity economy. As you may know, the social economy is a concept that is tending to become more and more legitimate and consensual in the international level. We have several signs for that, especially ILO declaration in 2022, OECD resolution the same year, and the last one in 2023 was the UN General Assembly declaration about social economy. So there is a movement towards consensus about the terminology of social economy and about what it means in the international sphere. Today I will speak about social economy in France especially. France is, I think, a special case regarding social economy, because social economy has in France a very long history, and this history is a 200 years long history. Why 200 years? It may have been longer actually, or shorter, But I think this time is very significant because it's a time where the term of social economy occurred for the first time. And this is also the time when were formalized the model, organizational model of the social economy, and the principles that are very important for that model and very specific to that model. Principles here means especially two very important things. One is non-profit or limited profit distribution, strictly organized by rules. This is one. And the second one is democratic or participative governance, what was often called one person, one vote. Both principles reflect actually what can be called an a-capitalist vision of business. A-capitalist in the sense of non-capitalist. Power distribution, profit allocation are not based on capital property, like in conventional businesses. The story of social economy in France, like many other stories of anything, anywhere, has its ups and downs. Many experiences has been very short-lived, fragile, local, but a few ones have been very strong success stories and contributed more to the setting of that conception of economy and business. In the French context, progressively, we had several initiatives, several forms of a common model. We had first mutual benefit societies that emerged at the late 18th century to deal with health issues, organized by small groups, usually professionally in most of the time. Then you had consumer co-ops or group of consumers that opened shops, social shops, in order to secure an access to very necessary goods. You have also some collective of workers that became later workers' co-ops in order to preserve their work, their conditions of work, and their power inside the company. You have many non-profits that developed in France after the enactment of a law in 1901. It's interesting to say that this law has never been changed since 120 years. And it was used in many areas, including education, social service provision, sports and leisure, and so on. A bit later, we could see in the French context the emergence of specific insurance mutual benefit that provided some insurance services to their members. Again, with in accordance with the two principles I mentioned, non-profit and democratic. We could see also a bit later, 1940s, the emergence of retailers' cooperatives. That means retailers that organize together into a cooperative. And later, 2001, there was a law in France introduced for multi-stakeholder cooperatives. Cooperatives where the members belong to different categories. French economists that probably you know the names, at least one, Léon Walras, and another one, Charles Gide, maybe less known, were among the first at the end of the 19th century to discuss and to formalize social economy and its identity, its scope. inside the social economy and through the different laws that were introduced in France progressively since the 19th century, we can identify four main movements, four main pillars. One is cooperative in many sectors, like in Korea, for example, like in many countries, different types of cooperatives, producers, workers, consumers, multi-stakeholders. Another one is mutual benefit societies. This one is less familiar for you probably, because in Korea it's not very famous, not very popular. They are non-profit insurance business companies. So they are democratic, non-profit, and there are two groups, two types. One for insurance of goods, like house or car, basically, and another one for insurance of health of people. So this second type is complementary to the national health insurance system that you have in France, like in Korea. And most French people do have such a complementary non-profit mutual benefit insurance, which means that when they come to be ill, the national system plus the complementary system will cover almost all the spendings. Third one is associations. I already mentioned the 1900 law and different directions. And the fourth one is foundations, which is a different typical form and under a different law. If you consider the common distinction between mutual interest and general interest that you probably heard of, you can say that inside the social economy, some organizations are mostly driven by the general interest, associations and foundations, while other ones, like cooperative and mutual benefit societies, they are much more geared towards the mutual interest of the members. But actually, most social economy organizations intertwine these two different forms of interest, mutual and general. Social economy in France has a long history, I told you, and since 1980s, the beginning of 1980s, it was introduced in national policies and national government. And a very significant step was in 2014 when we enacted a law about the social economy in France. I will speak about this law in order to make you understand the current situation. This law was enacted the 31st of July 2014. So it means next week we'll have the 10th anniversary of the law in France. It's not the first one in Europe. Spain, Portugal already had enacted such a law before France, but it's among the first ones. And what is interesting to stress is this law get a very strong consensus because it was co-constructed by different stakeholders, like government, of course, but also the organizations in the field that were involved in the process to discuss the law and to build the law. This law is important because first it indicates that the social economy that previously was the social movement has become a model of business in the French context. A specific model of business with specific principles that are detailed in the law. I already mentioned them. In the Article 1 of the law, it is said that to belong to the social economy, a company, a business, should follow a name which is not limited to profit distribution, should have a democratic or participative governance, and should have some rules in order to organize the distribution of the profits and limit the distribution of the profits. Through the law, it's the very true legal recognition of social economy in France that occurred. That's why the law is important. It's important also because it recognizes the historical players of the social economy that have been existing sometimes for 200 years or a few decades. But it's interesting also because the law opened the door for new belongers to the social economy, to organizations that did not belong to the historical players, but respect the same principles. They are called commercial enterprises of social economy. The law also emphasizes one thing through that opening and through that was often called inclusive dimension. The law emphasizes the social utility that can have some businesses in their operation. So there is a definition of social utility in the framework of the law, and this definition serves as a boussole for commercial companies that pretend to belong to the social economy. The law also introduces a label, very specific label called ESUS, Solidarity Enterprise of Social Utility, which is something that is awarded to businesses that go farther than strictly belonging to social economy, especially to societies, to companies that accept to limit their wage distribution. So to get that label and the benefits which are associated to that label, the company should accept to keep the scale of wages inside 1 to 7. The highest wage cannot be 7 times more than the lowest. Also, the last point of the slide.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
Is there any benefit that get this ESUS label? For example, tax benefits or?
You have several kind of tax benefits that can be awarded to social economy organizations, including ESUS, and the ESUS can access to a specific financing coming from a special funding.
Among the entire social enterprise in France, what proportion of the social enterprise got this ESUS labeling?
That's a good question, because in France we don't have a clear definition of social enterprise. There is no legal framework for social enterprise. So according to, there are different definitions of social enterprise that can be considered. If you consider, for example, the European perspective that has been developed by the IMES network, you can enter into that definition a part of the social economy. Associations, most of them, mutual benefit societies, they are non-profit, they are democratic, they have a social aim, so they are social enterprises. But it's a debate still open in France. What is social enterprise and what kind of organizations can be considered as social enterprise? In Korea, you have a law, 2006 law, that certified social enterprises. So you may refer to that law, it's an option, and say that certified social enterprises are only certified social enterprises are social enterprises. But actually, if you consider, like I mentioned, like I said in France, the definition, you may also consider all the forms of enterprises, like Chawal, for example, or other cooperatives, which are not necessarily certified, but actually present the same features like social enterprises. So the debate is probably more simple in Korea because there is a law, but not completely close yet in Korea. So in France, no definition, and it is important to understand that the French context is strongly influenced and built upon the concept of social economy, not social enterprise. Ten years after the law, because I mentioned we will have the 10th anniversary next week, what can we say? First, we can say that there is a satisfaction among social economy regarding the law. There is no demand for a new law, for amending the law. There is a global satisfaction. However, what is interesting to stress is 10 years later, social economy did not develop well after the law. So the law fails, in a sense, to generate a change of scale of the social economy. Some parts of the social economy developed, some of them developed quite well, but other parts decreased or had a stagnation during those 10 years. So it's not easy to say that the law generated an increase of the social economy. Of course, the context was complicated. COVID, Ukraine, and other events that made the context probably more complicated, not easy. But what is significant, however, is whereas the social economy before the law was creating more jobs than conventional companies, since about 8 years, conventional companies create more jobs than social economy in France. A point now to show you and make you understand what are the main achievements of the social economy in the French context. First we have data about social economy, which is not so common. In Korea, for example, it's quite difficult to get data about social economy. You can get data about certified social enterprises because there is an agency for that collects data. You can get data about specific types of cooperatives or over SEO, but it's difficult so far in Korea to aggregate the different data available. So you don't have an aggregate data for Korean social economy. In France, you have an aggregate, not completely I would say that do not completely answer all the questions, but that can provide an interesting view about the social economy. Because that issue of data was advocated already some 40 years ago. And the NGO that I mentioned, I've been co-sharing for a few years, was a pioneer one in that issue about producing data about social economy. Because what cannot be counted doesn't count. If you don't have data, you're not visible and you're not legitimate. So through the advocative action of this ADES NGO, progressively data were produced, released in France by NSEO, INSEE in France, by the National Observatory of Social Economy that was launched by the movements of the social economy, and also by different specific umbrella organizations that wanted to get more precise data about their members. For example, the Umbrella Federation for Cooperatives, or for example, Observatory of Foundations provides now regularly some data about cooperatives, for one, about foundations, for the other one. And also academic works that provides complementary data. The data available in France, I said, were quite complete, but not completely complete. The reference index actually is jobs, salaried jobs. So regarding the number of jobs in full time, it's important to say, to precise and to be able to measure in full times, because there are many part-times in the social economy. So the number of jobs in full time, the quality of employment inside the social economy, is it regular, not regular jobs? Is it a contract without a term with a specific term? We have very complete data about that. And this is not very usual to find such data among European countries. We also have other data, but they are more fragile. For example, about the number of units. We know the number of units inside the social economy, but we don't know exactly the number of creations and collapsing within a year. We have data about the financing, but again, it's difficult and it's not complete data about the financing of the social economy. We have data, I finish and give you the mic, about volunteer works, but again, it's very difficult to have a precise measurement of volunteering. Yeah.
Is there any system or platform in France that make the social enterprise like mandatorily release their data for economic and social performance? For example, you know well in the system in Korea that for social enterprise in South Korea, it's all voluntary to release their economic and social performance.
Yeah.
However, the social cooperative under the direction of the Ministry of Finance, they have to report their social and economic performance. It's a mandatory. So I'm just wondering in France whether there is any system that they voluntarily or mandatorily release their economic and social data.
No, but there are some mandatory requirements, and that's why the main index is jobs, because that mandatory requirements are focused on jobs. How many salaried jobs you have, the level of wages. So such declarations are compulsory for SC, for all organizations. If they have a business activity, so including SC organizations. So, but regarding the financing, it's not so, the compulsory rules are not so clear, so we cannot get the same precision in the data. And there is one remaining question is what is the contribution of social economy to GDP? In France, I don't know if some of you tried to find information about social economy in France. Maybe you found the data 10% of GDP. Problem is it's not really a true data. Social economy is 10% of employment. And this 10% of employment has been misused sometimes in 10% of GDP. But actually we don't know exactly what is the GDP contribution of the social economy, because although there were several efforts, including by ADES, the NGO I'm co-sharing, to build a satellite account of social economy. The satellite account is the tool that will allow to say how many percent of GDP is produced by a group. But that satellite account is still under construction. So we don't know. Probably the contribution to GDP of French social economy is around 6 or 7%, according to estimations. But these are estimations, and they date back for 15 years now. So we cannot say more than that. What we can say is 10% of jobs, 2 million full-time jobs inside French social economy, all the organizations I mentioned before. The distribution inside is for more than 70% of those jobs in associations, not cooperatives, associations. Cooperatives is about 15% of the jobs. The mutual benefit is about 6%. Foundation about 5%, and there is a remaining 2%, which is the new category introduced by the law of the commercial company belonging to the social economy. In terms of units, it makes, you see the data, 155,000 units. Again, mostly associations, which means mostly units registered under the 1901 law governing associations. And there are two types that I wanted to say a bit more, is the SCOP and CIRIEC. SCOP is workers' corps, French workers' corps. CIRIEC is French multi-stakeholders corps. Why did I pick them? Not because they are very important inside the social economy. You can see here is less than 4% of the jobs inside the social economy, so relatively small, we will say. But because it's among the few ones that developed well after the enactment of the law of the 2014. And especially CIRIEC, multi-stakeholder cooperatives, developed well in relation with transitional issues, ecological and social transitions. The CIRIEC is interesting because it's a multi-stakeholders. What does it mean in the French law? It means that the CIRIEC must have at least 3 different stakeholders. Among the 3 is compulsory, the workers, and the recipients, the users, the beneficiaries. And another one, at least, but maybe 2 or 3 or 4 other ones. So 3 minimum, necessarily the workers and the users, beneficiaries, and among the other ones, maybe the local government. So the CIRIEC is an interesting framework to associate together the workers, the users, some citizens, for example, some providers, and the local government, which make it a quite interesting framework to deal with specific issues that concern the public side and the society and the workers, some persons much more involved in companies. So workers' COPS is 2,700 units, CIRIEC is 1,400 units, so it's relatively small if you compare to, I don't remember the data about social COPS in Korea, which are very close to the CIRIEC in France, but maybe similar, I don't know exactly, I don't remember the data, maybe you know. How are distributed the jobs inside the social economy according to their business industry, to their field of activity? You can see that here, and you can see that 40% of the jobs are in the field of social action, which means social services provision, which means healthcare or care to elderly, to handicapped people, etc. Here you will find among the social economy players mostly associations and mutual benefit societies, plus foundations. For 14%, the jobs are in education. It's quite important because in France you have many private schools that use the associative status, so they fall into that category. They are very popular until the high school level in France, secondary, middle, and high school, before university. 10% is in the insurance and banking sector. Here you will find some cooperative and insurance mutual benefit companies. It's important to call back that they are non-profits. So they are insurance mutual benefit companies. They provide insurance services, insurance products, but they are non-profits. So they are in competition with for-profits. Then you find other categories, other fields, professional services, services to B2B, business to business, 7%, mostly COPS. Sports, for sport practices of people, mostly associations. And remaining category for the 16% that are not already counted. So here you can see the market share of the social economy in the different sector where it is involved. Market share is not exactly the word that should be used, but it's to give you an idea about what it means. In social action, social economy represents in France 60% of the jobs. The rest, the 40% left, are mostly public, plus a small share of private in the sense of for-profits, conventional companies. In sports is a bit less, 56% of the market is occupied, is held by the social economy organizations. In art and culture is 30%. In insurance and banking is 30%. So the credit cooperatives like Nongyap in Korea, for example. Plus the insurance mutual benefit societies. They hold together 30% of the insurance and banking market in France. Education and training. Here the social economy is a bit less than 20%. The rest of the market is mostly public. Don't forget that in France, like here in Seoul National University, the universities are public for almost all of them. And in the health sector, the social economy is about 11% of the sector. Here again, like in education, like in sport, like in social action, we have industries where the other player, the competitor, we can say also, is the public side, besides the social economy.
Eric, can you go back?
Yep.
Go back to the slide.
This one?
I'm curious about the insurance and banking. So the only difference between these, say, co banks and commercial banks are that they are member-oriented.
Yeah.
In the case of co.
So they are member-oriented, so they apply the democratic governance.
And for instance, you have one of the largest banks in the world, agricultural.
Yeah, Crédit Agricole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said there?
It belongs to that.
But the existence, the sheer purpose of their existence is to make profits. No?
A cooperative is allowed to make profit. All AC organizations actually have to make profit for their sustainability.
And also, is that possible to
But
distribute profits?
That they cannot distribute profit freely. Some of them, by status, cannot at all distribute profits, so we call them profits. And other, like cooperative, they can distribute, but under very specific rules. And for example, Crédit Agricole and many big cooperatives, they belong to the social economy because they have the democratic, there are some principles, some rules for democratic governance, for restricted profit distribution, but they also created many subsidiaries that are not cooperatives, that can distribute their profits. So it's a mix between the social economic principles, identity, and the conventional company's identity.
Let me speak in Korean. 그러니까 불란서의 이 사회적 경제라는 것은 되게 포괄적인 개념이에요. 이게 이제 그러니까 방금 질문한 것도 농협 같은 것도 과연 우리나라에서는 사회적 경제에 포함될 거냐? 거의 안 될 거 아니에요, 그렇죠? 근데 여기 정의는 아까 세 개 이제 원칙, 이게 데모크라틱한 가버넌스가 있어야 된다. 그다음에 이제 대부분 이익을 분배할 수 없는 그런 기준 같은 것들이 있으니까 그런 기준만 맞으면 사회적 경제를 하기 때문에 우리보다 훨씬 더 포괄적인 개념으로 정의돼서 훨씬 더 많은 부분을 차지하고 있는 거라고 이해하시면 될 것 같아요. Sorry, go ahead.
I will come back to that point in the following slide a bit more. So compared to conventional companies, it is interesting to stress a few points about social economy. First is the social economy companies has a higher resiliency than conventional companies. Some studies showed that they are more sustainable than conventional companies. They are more resistant to crisis, to difficult situations than conventional companies. Another point is there's strong relation with the local community, with the territory. For example, if you compare the main offices of big cooperatives with the main offices of conventional companies, you will find a higher rate of local offices not in Paris but in regions. Whereas conventional companies tend to have their main office in Paris and around Paris. They also have a very typical pyramid of age. The workers inside the social economy are older. They are more numerous in the older brackets. There is also a very specific gender distribution among the workers inside SE. The share of women is higher than the share of men among the workers, not among the board's members, which is very important to precise. But among the workers, we can say also that that distribution is true for low-skilled workers, but also for managers. So even for managers, there are more women than men inside social economy. It's not limited to low-skill employment, like we could think sometimes. Another point is the contribution, the linkage between the social economy and the general interest, and between social economy and public policies. Not all the social economy, but a large part of the social economy is closely related to public policies and to serve general interest in terms of social inclusion, work integration, etc. And last point, which is a very specific feature of the social economy and its model, is the combination of salaried job and volunteer jobs, which is very important because volunteer jobs is free, no cost, so it allows the social economy to give sometimes an answer where the conventional business cannot, because it has to support another cost that social economy do not have to support. I mentioned the linkage with general interest and public policies. The relation between the social economy and the public sector is very complex because it's not the same all the times. Sometimes it's complementary to public schemes. Sometimes it may be in competition with public schemes, with public offer. And in other cases, it may be in substitution, where there is no public answer. The social economy sometimes brings an answer. So the two sectors, in the French context, social economy and public sector, are closely intertwined, and because they both bring a contribution to the general interest in their own manner. And if we look at the history, we can see that very often actually the social economy emerged to address some needs, some demands that the government did not address or did not sufficiently address. Sometimes the social economy contributed to renew the public schemes, the public policies. And in some cases, the public side progressively replaced the social economy. If you think about health insurance, national health insurance. First, it was addressed by mutual benefit societies from the beginning of the 19th century. And then the national system was installed in France during the 20th century, and especially after World War II. And the mutual benefit societies had to change their contribution. So from the primary player, they became the secondary player, to bring a complementary coverage of healthcare. What is interesting to stress also is the recognition of the social economy by the public side through laws, through specific schemes, specific policies, is almost always with opposite effects. It gives more financing, it contributes to sustainability of fragile experiences, contributes to develop, to expand local initiatives, but in the same time it introduces a control, a stricter control, and bring, in some cases, the social economy organizations to make some distance with their primary mission, which can be changed under that control, under that public recognition. So it's a mixed relation with very opposite effects for the social economy. So let's go back to the point that Professor Kim developed before. If you compare social economy in France and in Korea, okay, you understood that in France the social economy has a longer history than in Korea. When I began to study social economy in Korea was in the late 1990s. Nobody knows what I was talking about. That concept was unknown in Korea. Or when it was not completely unknown, it was very, very suspicious because it was associated to socialism, to North Korea, etc. So in a few relatively short time, the situation changed a lot in Korea. There were some spectacular progress that were done in 25 years in Korea regarding the social economy, the understanding of the social economy. Institutionalization of the social economy in France is more advanced, which is quite logical due to the long history. We have a law, 2014 law about social economy. We have specific schemes, policies in the French institutional framework for social economy. And there is a consensus about the scope, about what is social economy, about the perimeter, the boundaries in the French context. As Professor Kim mentioned before, in the Korean context, the perimeter is not the same and is not completely stable about what is inside, what is outside. Nongyeop, for example, is quite systematically outside because of a specific history related to the government as a state agency, etc., etc. For a long time not democratic. But Nongyeop belongs to the international organizations of cooperatives. So it's questionable where should we put Nongyeop actually, inside, outside. So far in Korea it remains outside, and Nongyeop itself doesn't want to be considered inside the social economy. So in France there is a consensus, and the perimeter is relatively stable, and the law enacted in 2014 made it more stable even. And we have also data, I mentioned it. In Korea, still data are scarce, not aggregate, very fragile about each part of the social economy, and it's still impossible to build an aggregate of data for the whole social economy in Korea. What I want to stress is, in France, the social economy is defined by its model with its specific principles: democratic governance, non-profit, limited profit allocation. In Korea, so far, the social economy is defined by its aim, social aim, to have a social utility, to contribute to employment of specific groups of persons, to provide social services for specific categories. That's the main philosophy behind the social economy. This philosophy has been a bit expanded recently towards local development, towards environment issues. So it allowed to include inside the perimeter, for example, consumer scopes like Hanselim or iCoop that initially were not in the same dynamic. So we can see in Korea that the scope is different, is not stabilized like in France, is dynamic, is moving still, under discussion. Maybe if a law is enacted, but it's about 10 years now that we are speaking about a law for social economy, and it seems to be very difficult to make it. If a law is enacted, maybe it will contribute to stabilize the perimeter. But in Korea, what is important to stress is that in a short period, very, very important, spectacular progress have been done. And now, if you look at papers, research about social economy internationally, Korea is very often studied, quoted as a very specific case, interesting case. This is the last point, the last slide, I think. Yeah. This is the last slide to open a bit the perspective towards the future, the challenges, the tensions that social economy has to face in France, in my view. It's not, it's questionable, it's my interpretation. First, what I would like to say is if you look at the French case, and with a long feedback now, you can see the capacity that social economy has to inspire public policies through social innovation. In many cases, by innovating socially, the social economy contributed to introduce new public answers to different problems. And the social economy is a major player as a co-producer of public policies, in a sense. Co-production in many ways, I think, both in inspiring public policies and in applying, being a partner for public policies. So I think this capacity to social innovation is a very important feature that the social economy has to make living, to keep living in the future. Even if we have a very, very well developed public system in terms of social policies, for example, there remain some unaddressed or insufficiently addressed needs, and there is new needs emerging. And the social economy has to keep its capacity to find original and innovative ways to address those needs. What we can see is social economy is well prepared to bring an answer in some areas where we are expecting some new jobs, especially personal services. So there is a challenge for economy to both address these new needs, but create good jobs, good quality jobs to do it. And this challenge is not completely well addressed now by the social economy. If you consider the quality of jobs inside the social economy, this quality is on average lower than in conventional companies, small SMEs or big companies. And there is a challenge for social economy to make the jobs more decent in such areas. And this challenge is not easy because in such areas it's not the problem of the social economy, it's the problem of the field of activity itself that generates bad conditions of work for every workers, whether they are in social economy or in other companies. So this challenge is not easy, but it's a very important challenge for social economy to be able to create jobs where we need jobs and to create decent jobs. And last point, if we look at recent transformations, we can see two phenomena of hybridization of the social economy. One is what I call capitalist hybridization. We already began to speak about that with Crédit Agricole and big cooperatives that create subsidiaries, conventional subsidiaries, and become very complex groups. In some SE organizations, for example, the case I mentioned, but also the mutual health benefit societies, some big associative groups, social entrepreneurs, we can see a strong pressure to finally become like their competitors, become like conventional companies with whom they are in competition. They incorporate into their activities more and more principles that comes from usual conventional companies, and they lose partly their SE identity. It's a isomorphism phenomenon that brings social economy be more close to capitalist companies. And this phenomenon has been encouraged by the development of CSR, for example, by the rise of what is sometimes called the moral capitalism. So it's still capitalism, but it's more moral than the usual one. But it creates an image which is not clear, a boundary which is difficult to situate between the social economy and the capitalist system. And another hybridization is what I call civic hybridization, is the rise of new forms, and especially the CIC, the multi-stakeholder cooperative that I mentioned before, into activities where they were not very much involved before, and where they try to combine mutual and general interest through their specific framework of multi-stakeholders. So it's, for example, in some industries that were previously public and have been open to competition, like transportation, energy, water distribution, for example, in which we can see that such SIC are more and more present because they are a good tool, finally, to preserve both the general interest in terms of large access to services and the mutual interest of people that are involved inside. That second form of hybridization is the lever for what I said before, preserving the social innovation capacity of the social economy. And the challenge of the social economy is to how those two different forms of hybridization will compete together, and will the social economy tend to be like conventional companies, or continue to be innovative and to propose a different business approach. And behind this, but we are far from this, unfortunately, is will the social economy have the capacity to be the norm of business in the future, instead of the capitalist firm, which so far was the standard in many matters. So that's my final point. This question opened. So I hope you will enjoy the presentation, and if you have questions, we can have a direction now.